you to all three of you. Two presidents, one prime minister, though in Italy you are allowed to say President Renzi also. By the format we have agreed upon, what I will do is we will begin this discussion with first a discussion with our host president, President Putin, and then I will widen that conversation to include Prime Minister Renzi and President Nazarbayev. We started a little bit late, so we will go a little bit longer. President Putin, let me ask you a very simple question. Since 2014, you have had European Union sanctions and US sanctions against Russia. NATO has announced just this week that it is going to build up forces in states that border Russia. Russia has announced its own buildup. Are we settling into a low-grade, lower-level Cold War between the West and Russia?
Мне не хотелось бы так думать, что мы...
I wouldn't want to think that we are going down to some sort of a Cold War, and I'm sure no one is interested in that. For sure, we are not the ones who would want that. There is no need in that. And most importantly, the logic behind the development of international relations. No matter how dramatic it might seem, it is not the logic of global confrontation. So, what is the root cause of all of it? I'll have to go back. Nevertheless, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we thought and we expected that the era of common benevolence and common mutual trust will start. Unfortunately, back then, Europe was confronted with numerous economic and social challenges, including the internal political ones. We were faced with separatism, radicalism, aggression, on the side of international terrorism. In the Caucasus, the representatives of Al-Qaeda were fighting. That is an obvious fact, which is not denied by anyone. And instead of getting support, which we expected so much, the support given to our efforts aimed at fighting against these challenges, unfortunately, we saw something quite different. We saw how this separatism was supported. As we were told, we are not receiving your separatists at the highest level. We are doing that at the technological level, well, at an expert level. Well, thanks for that, at least. Then it was followed by information support, financial support, administrative support. We witnessed all of it. That's okay. But when we managed to deal with all those problems, to cope with them, when we had to go through ordeals, what we saw was quite a different story. Soviet Union does not exist anymore. The Warsaw Pact ceased to exist. But why would NATO improve and expand its infrastructure, getting closer to the Russian borders? So right now, Montenegro is being accepted. Who is threatening Montenegro? Well, you see, they turn a blind eye to our position. They neglect our position in all the aspects. Yet another very important problem is the unilateral withdrawal from the ABM Treaty. It is not a coincidence that the United States and Russia came to an agreement on the ABM. There were two areas under protection, Moscow on our side, and in the United States, that is the dislocation of anti-ballistic missiles area. It had to do with the need to ensure strategic balance in the world. Unfortunately, there was a unilateral withdrawal, and as we were told, that was not an act against us. If we want to develop offensive arms. We believe that this is not set against us. Do you know why they said that? The answer is simple. No one thought back then that at the beginning of the year 2000, Russia, that was engrossed into internal confrontations, internal difficulties, political, economic problems, ravaged by terrorism, that Russia would be able to restore its military and defense systems. Not only did they think that we wouldn't be able to produce new arms, strategic arms, they were confident that we would continue to degrade, and they believed that they're going to increase their capabilities, whereas our capabilities would shrink. And all of it was carried out under the pretext of the nuclear threat coming from Iran. Where is this threat right now? It doesn't exist anymore, but the project continues to be developed. That is how it all developed, one step after another. And besides, after all color revolution were fostered, including the so-called Arab Spring, well, they were supporting it overwhelmingly. There were so many positive assessments with regard to those developments. And what did these developments result in? They resulted in the chaos. I'm not going to put a blame on anyone. What I want to say is that if this policy of unilateral sanctions is to continue without sensitive for the international community steps on the international arena to be agreed upon, these consequences would be inevitable. And on the contrary, should we listen to each other, seeking to maintain a balance, these consequences would be averted. Yes, indeed, the process of negotiations is very difficult, but that is the only way towards mutually acceptable solutions. I believe that if we manage to come to that level of cooperation, one would even think and talk about the Cold War times. After the Arab Spring, they're approaching our borders. Why should they have supported the coup d'etat in Ukraine? I mentioned that on many occasions. Internal political situation is quite difficult there, and the opposition that is in power right now could have come to power as a result of democratic reforms and elections. And that's it, and we would have to work with them in the same way as we worked with the power that the authorities were in power at the time of Yanukovych. Instead, they took the way of civil war victims, scaring the Russian-speaking population in the southeast of Ukraine, in the Crimea. For what sake? And after we were forced to make measures to protect certain groups of the population, this scaremongering and warmongering continued. Probably all of it was aimed at giving grounds behind the existence of the NATO. What they need is an external enemy. Otherwise, no one would think why this organization is needed. There is no more Warsaw Pact, neither the USSR. Why would they need that? If we stick to this very logic, to scaremongering, that's probably the way to a Cold War. Our logic is a bit different, aimed at finding compromises and negotiations and cooperation.
So let me ask you, Mr. President, then what is the way out? Because I saw an interview of yours you did with Die Welt, the German newspaper, in which you said the key problem is that the Minsk Accords have not been implemented by the government in Ukraine, by Kiev, the constitutional reforms. They say on the other side that in eastern Ukraine, the violence has not come down and the separatists are not restraining themselves, and they believe Russia should help. So since neither side seems to back down, will the sanctions just continue? Will this low-grade Cold War just continue? What is the way out?
Дело ведь не в сепаратистах, а дело в людях, как бы их ни называли.
It's not about separatists. It's about people, no matter how they are called, people who are trying to protect their legitimate rights and interests, who are afraid of repression. in case these interests are not observed at the political level. Just look at the wording of the Minsk agreements. There is a number of provisions, actually, that should be taken into account. We were arguing about them for the whole night. And what was the argument about? We came to an agreement that most importantly was to address political questions which would ensure security for the people living in the relevant territories of the Donbas. What political solutions am I talking about? Well, everything is in the Minsk Accords, amendments to the constitution that should have been adopted until the end of 2015. But where are these amendments? There are none. There should have been enacted the law on the special status of these territories, which we call unrecognized republics. This law was adopted by the parliament of the country, but it is not implemented. Even now, the amnesty law should have been adopted. It was adopted by the parliament of Ukraine, but it hasn't been signed by the president. What elections can be organized? How can we talk about the election process being implemented in the conditions of the anti-terrorist operation? Is there anywhere in the world where elections are being organized against the backdrop of the anti-terrorist operation on this territory? This operation should be repealed. We should get back to economic recovery, to the humanitarian development, and nothing is being done in those areas. And putting off the addressing of the solutions, giving grounds and justifying that by the conflict along the engagement line, that is just an attempt to justify that. They keep saying that people keep shooting each other from both sides. And people whom we call separatists say that shooting is being launched by the governmental forces, and then they have to shoot in response to that. That's what's going on. But should it prevent them from political transformations? They should be launched as soon as possible, and they should be the basis for the other developments. Some things should go hand in hand, and I mentioned that I would agree to Mr. Poroshenko when he says that we need to reinforce the OSCE mission, including letting them carry light arms with them. Additional measures can be issued in order to ensure a high level of security, but one shouldn't justify oneself by the lack of settlement on those areas, putting off the political transformations. That's it.
There are so many areas to cover with you, Mr. President. So let me go to the Middle East, where Russia has had a forceful intervention to bolster the Assad regime. President Assad now says that his goal is to take back every square inch of his territory. Do you believe that the solution in Syria is that the Assad regime should take back and govern every square inch of Syria?
Я считаю, что проблема Сирии это.
I believe that today the problem in Syria boils down to the fight against terrorism, but it's not all of it. At the core of this conflict, there are contradictions inside the Syrian society, and President Assad is aware of that. And the question is not about gaining control over various territories, although it is very important. The question is to ensure trust on side of all the society, confidence on the side of various parts of the society to each other, and based on this confidence and trust to shape an efficient management and administration that will be trusted by the whole population of the country. And there is no other way but the way of political negotiations. We have been calling upon that on many occasions. President Assad keeps mentioning it as well. He is committed to this process. What is to be done? We need to be actively involved in the process for development of the new constitution, and based on which new elections, presidential elections, parliamentary elections are to be organized. When President Assad visited Moscow, we talked about that, and he agreed to that, and all of it should be organized under the strict control of the United Nations. Yesterday, together with Mr. de Mistura and UN Secretary General, discussed this topic in great detail. Everyone agrees to that. Now, some measures should be made, and we do hope that our American partners would work with their allies who support the opposition so that to encourage this opposition to work constructively with the Syrian authorities. Well, you see, every time I ask my colleagues why they're doing all of it there, they say that they're trying to reassert the principle of democracy there because the Assad regime's way is not democratic and we want democracy prevail there. We're asking whether democracy is spread throughout the region. They said, well, it's not the way, but there should be democracy in Syria. Then asked whether democracy can be asserted as a result of force. All of it can be done only through democratic procedures. And what do these democratic procedures imply? The only ultimate way to ensure democracy is through elections based on the constitution, formulated in a clear and transparent way and adopted by the majority of the population. First, adopt the constitution and then hold elections based on this constitution. There is nothing bad about that, particularly when it's going to be implemented under the international control. Some countries of the region say that they do not really understand what democracy is. Do we want to replace one undemocratic regime with another, which is undemocratic as well? But if we want to insert democracy, we need to use democratic tools to do that. Well, this process is difficult, and nothing will happen overnight. And many keep saying that something should be done today, and I would agree to the proposal put forth by our partners, including the American partners, according to which maybe I'm saying something I'm not supposed to say, but I believe that it is a well-known fact in the region. It is a well-known fact for the negotiators representing the opposition and the government. I'm referring to this American proposal, which is quite acceptable. We should think about the ways to incorporate the representatives of the opposition into the existing power bodies, including the government. We should think about the authorities of this government. But again, we don't need to outreach ourselves. We should be guided by the current reality. We shouldn't be striving to set forth goals that cannot be achieved. When partners say that Assad should go tomorrow, and after that they say it's not going to be tomorrow, but at the same time they insist on restructuring of the authorities, which would actually imply his going. It's not the way to go. We need to go step by step with the participation of all the sides. Should this take place, and I'm sure that will take place, then we would be able to speak about complete settlement and elections. What we need to avoid is the disintegration of the country, and should we go the way that we are taking right now, it might happen, and that is the worst-case scenario. After the disintegration of the country, I don't think that quasi-states would live in peace and accord with each other. That would be a huge destabilizing factor, both for the region and the world as well.
Let me ask you, Mr. President, about another democracy that is having a very different kind of drama. You made some comments about the American Republican presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. You called him brilliant, outstanding, talented. These comments were reported around the world. I was wondering what in him led you to that judgment, and do you still hold that judgment?
Вот Вы известный человек в нашей стране, вот вы лично.
You personally are very famous in our country. You're not only famous as a journalist in one of the biggest TV stations, but as an intellectual. Why do you always change the meaning of what I said? Because at the moment you speak as a journalist, not as an analyst. Why are you juggling with what I said? I only said that he was a bright person. Isn't he bright? He is. I did not say anything else about him. But there's one thing that I paid attention to and that I definitely welcome, is that Mr. Trump said he's ready to restore full-fledged Russian-American relations. What can there be bad about it? Don't you welcome it? We all welcome it.
Но мы не вмешиваемся,
But we never interfere into the internal political processes of other countries, especially those in the United States. We are ready to work with any president that the American people will vote for. Though, actually, they always teach others how to live. But do you think that the elections are democratic in the United States? Do you think that they are organized democratically? Because, you know, twice in the US history, the American people, the majority of the people, elected persons who had not been supported by the majority of people because they were chosen by people who had the right to vote. My colleagues and I never blamed anyone, but when we discussed, they just said, don't meddle into this. We are doing it the way we are used to. But then, what I feel like saying is, then why are you meddling with our affairs? But I'd like to say again that, of course, it's none of our business. But, you know, I heard that American prosecutors were trying to get rid of the international observers at the voting stations. But they're used to it. They like it the way it is. The US is a great power. At the moment, it is probably the only superpower, and we accept this fact. We want to work with the US, and we are ready to do that. And no matter how these elections are held, eventually they will be held. There will be a new head of state elected. They will have broad authority. I know that there are complex economic and political processes in the United States. At the moment, the world needs a country as strong as the US is, and we do need the US too. But what we do not need is for them to interfere with our affairs all the time, to instruct us how to live, to prevent Europe from building relations with us. You know, the sanctions that you've mentioned, is the US touched by the sanctions? No. They have not suffered from the sanctions in any way. It is the Europe that has been affected by the sanctions. And Russia has been affected as well. But for the US, no, there has been no effect. But the Americans persuade their partners to continue the sanctions. Why? Maybe Matteo can explain to us why they have to continue suffering from the sanctions, and the Americans try to persuade them to endure the sanctions for some more time. Why? Matteo is a wonderful speaker. He spoke so persuasively and sincerely. Italy can be proud of such prime minister because you spoke so beautifully today. You know, we are not praising anyone. It is none of our business. You know, as the Germans say, it's not our beer to meddle with it. Because, you know, when the US elect a president, we are going to work with anyone, whoever that is, because the American people trust this person. But we hope that this will be a person who will strive for developing relations with our country, and creating a more secure world.
Just to be clear, Mr. President, the word brilliant was in the Interfax translation. I realize that other translations might say it's bright, but I use the official Interfax translation. But let me ask you about another person you have dealt with a great deal. Mr. Trump, you've never met. Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. In your very long question and answers with the Russian people, you made a joke about when somebody asked you about her, you said, I think that the Russian idiom is the husband and wife is the same devil. And what it means in the English version is it's two sides of the same coin. What did you mean by that? And what do you think, how did she do as Secretary of State? You dealt with her extensively.
Чего не скажешь сгоряча.
Well, probably I just said that hot-heartedly. Probably I just was impulsive when I said that about her. I did not work with her that much. Mr. Lavrov was our foreign minister back then. That was him who worked with her. He is going to be like Mr. Gromyko, who used to be our foreign minister during the Soviet Union times. He will stay the foreign minister as long as that one did. I'd like to say that I worked a lot with the American president back then, and I can say that we shared very good relations, and I'm even grateful to him for the signs of attention and respect to me personally and to Russia when I started my term as the president of the Russian Federation. And speaking about Madam Clinton, she probably has her own view regarding the development of the Russian-American relations. But there's one thing that I'd like to draw your attention to. It is not relevant to Russian-American relations or to any other big political issues. It is more relevant to human resources policy. Because, based on my own experience, I can say the following. I've seen many people change after they were appointed at some office. Because, when they have different responsibilities, they start to think differently, to speak differently, and even their appearances change. Because, we believe, in this regard, I can say that we believe that the sense of responsibility of the head of the state of the United States, and the United States is a country that a lot depends on in the world. We hope that this sense of responsibility will encourage the future American president to work together for a more secure world, to work constructively.
Mr. Putin, President Putin, let me finally ask you one question about news reports about Russian athletes. There are now 2 major investigations that have shown that Russian athletes have engaged in doping on a massive scale, and that there has been a systematic evasion and doctoring of testing and lab samples. And I was just wondering what your reaction to these reports is.
Я не очень понял, что значит программа по изменению образцов, которые были взяты.
I'm not sure I understood what it meant. The program added change in the samples that were taken for the doping tests. I thought that if samples are taken, they are always removed for storage to the international organizations. If the samples are taken, they always move to the international organizations, and we cannot affect them in any way. They are never stored in the territory of the Russian Federation. They are going to Lausanne or to some other city, I don't know. They can be reopened and rechecked, and I believe the experts are doing that at the moment. The doping problem is not only related to Russia, it is the problem that is relevant for the whole sports world. And if someone is trying to politicize this area, it is a big mistake. The same can be said about the culture. The sports area cannot be politicized. Sports is a bridge that brings people and states together, and this is the way we have to approach it. This cannot be a foundation for building anti-Russia or a policy aimed against some other country. And I can tell you with full responsibility that we are against any doping, we in Russia. Because, I have been an amateur athlete, and I believe that many people will agree with me when I say that if the doping is used, it is much less interesting to watch such competitions. The sport becomes less interesting for millions of spectators. And the second aspect that is very important is the health of athletes. Because nothing can justify harm that is brought to the human body. So at the state level, we've been fighting doping in sport, and we will continue doing that. As I know, the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation and the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation were investigating all the facts that mass media pointed out. I just believe that it is wrong to make a campaign out of it, to make a campaign that could jeopardize a sport, or including any Russian sport. And there's another aspect I'd like to mention. There's such a concept in law. There's only a concept of only individual responsibility. There's no concept of collective responsibility for athletes. There can be no collective responsibility for all athletes of a country, for example, because there are certain physical bodies that used performance-enhancing drugs. Maybe there are some, even if there are some physical bodies who committed violations, it cannot jeopardize all other athletes. At the moment we see that there are many problems in sports area. The European Football Cup is taking place at the moment, but I believe that people are paying more attention to fights, to the fan fights, than to football itself. And I regret saying this. I regret seeing that people attach such importance to fan fights. I guess that the responsibility for such acts should be as personalized as possible. And the way we treat the violators has to be the same. They all have to be equally treated. When the World Football Cup started, there was a fight of Russian fans with the British ones. But I don't know how 200 of Russian fans could fight several thousand of the British. Anyway, the law enforcement agencies have to treat all the violators in the same way. This is our position. We are going to work in this way in our fighting against stimulants and dopings, and we are going to work with the fans associations. And I believe that there are many sensible people among the fans who realize that any violations cannot express their support for the team they love. Any violations only jeopardize the teams they support. But I realize that we still have a lot to do in this area. But let me emphasize that we've never supported any violations in sport. We've never supported that at the state level. And we will never support this. We will never support any dopings or any other violations in this area. And we are going to cooperate with all the international organizations in this regard.
President Nazarbayev, if I may ask you a question. The United States is getting ready to ask itself, is America ready for a woman president? And I noticed that you have appointed a deputy prime minister who is a woman, and I'm wondering, at some point, do you think Kazakhstan will be ready for a female president?
Я думал, что президент Путин
I thought that President Putin has already answered all the questions,
успокоился уже.
and he's now
А почему вы считаете, что Казахстан
pleased. Why do you think that Kazakhstan cannot have a woman president? It may well be. Kazakhstan also, 51% of our population in Kazakhstan are women. Gender policy is developing normally. 30% of deputies of national parliament are women. Our government has ministers, several ministers, female ministers, so it is quite possible, especially given that there are some ladies who are well prepared for that. I also know some of them, don't I? Given that I have 3 daughters, I have very special attitude and relations towards ladies.
Prime Minister Renzi, I suppose I don't need to ask you the question because President Putin has already asked it to you. Why are you willing to suffer under the sanctions that the Americans have forced upon you? But let me ask the question in a slightly different way. It seems to me you are here. Former French President Sarkozy was here as well. The French Parliament has passed resolutions asking for the weakening of sanctions. Are the EU sanctions against Russia crumbling?
Meno male che non mi ha chiesto di mia figlia e soprattutto che non mi ha posto il tema dello sport, perché su questo si sta consumando.
First of all, I feel sorry that nobody asked me about sports, because this may lead to a very severe diplomatic crisis with President Putin, because the national team of Italy has been playing for 7 minutes now with the national team of Sweden, and I hope the result will be positive. Well, jokes aside, there are several things which I fully support, and some things which where I'm radically disagree with. I would like to point out, first of all, I fully agree with the wise approach towards the Syrian issue. I'd like to say that, in my view, what is important, that Russia should be party to this. Mr. Lavrov, whom I now call Mr. Gromyko, I suppose, Gromyko Lavrov has worked fruitfully in these weeks and months on these dossiers, and we're very interested that Russia should be a strategic partner in resolving a number of most important conflicts that really are relevant for the future of our planet. As to the sanctions issue, I would like to be on the record that there are strong differences. I strongly disagree with the attitude towards American democracy. I'm not sure which exactly was the adjective that Mr. Putin used to characterize Mr. Trump. I would also say we will work with whoever is elected, with whoever that might be. I personally hope that that person who will be elected would be next Madam President. That is my personal opinion. It may well be different from many of you entertain, but nevertheless, in any way we will respect the decision of the great democracy, and although the instruments that it has may lead to facts when sometimes popular vote does not necessarily coincide with the electors and superdelegates' votes, I still hope that the United States of America have really created a great model of democracy, and many of us have much that we could learn from it. As to the sanctions, these sanctions have 2 aspects. The first has to do with the reconstruction of the past, and Mr. Putin here certainly, from his perspective, has very clearly reproduced that, and some that look into the future. Well, in my presentation, I promised that I will not touch upon the past. For this reason, it would be contradiction to what I just said before if I had done so. Just a short tweet or maybe SMS message. When I was not at that time Prime Minister, and Vladimir Vladimirovich knows perfectly well that I became Prime Minister just in the heat of the February crisis of 2014. Nevertheless, I suppose that if we had reached a process that led to the imposition of sanctions, And the position of the United States in this seems to me pretty objective. What had really a strong impulse from a number of European leaders. Certainly there are problems about approaches, about respect for sovereignty in terms of behavior of Russia. But the other thing is there that President Putin said that we must respect the Pacta Sunt, respecting the agreements, constitutional and election matters. But there is one point here. It was not the United States that took a decision instead of somebody else. And Mr. Putin is perfectly aware that some European leaders have taken this decision and to accelerate a number of procedures which I had promised I would not speak about this because it is relevant to our past. But this is an initiative that was put forward by Europe. Mr. Putin asks, how much more are you going to put up with it? The answer is very simple. The Minsk agreements, and this is where I am fully supporting whatever has been said here before. But I can say that at the meeting in Milan, which was attended by Mr. Putin and Mr. Poroshenko, as well as Madam Merkel and Mr. Hollande and Prime Minister Cameron, I suggested that an example of the Italian region Il Sud Tyrol, depending on, or Alto Al, it depends on whatever name you prefer to call it by, where there is part of Italian population, a region that speaks Italian and it is an Italian region where some populations speak German. They received an international treaty and they now they have the right, so that this should serve as a model for East Ukraine. And this is, as I said, that some will be very interested in this suggestion, and I suppose we need to implement in full, the Minsk agreements. And I believe that today, at the stage where we are living at, the matter that has to do with relations between Russia and Europe, when you look at it only from the perspective from which we looked at it before today, it's short-sighted. It shows no promise. What we need to bear in mind that the word combination, the Cold War, can no longer be adopted as a lexic pertinent for the third millennium. Because if the word combination, the Cold War, is used today, it is beyond history. It is out of touch with reality. And it's not only unfair, it's absolutely useless. We need Europe and Russia again to become wonderful neighbors. We know that between neighbors, they may often have problems and disputes and controversies, but that in the Ukraine, what is the strong point for the Ukraine, that there is the agreement in place because the Minsk agreements have been signed. We want them to be totally implemented. And I recognize that and admit that implementation does not only those who are called separatists should be asked of all the interested parties. Because if it's only one party that does that, then the principle Pacta Sunt Servanda does not hold. And then I'm wrapping up. I'm not here to deliver speeches that, how shall I put it in Italian, that go along your fur, like I'm here representing a great country, Italy, that has very long-standing ties with Russia, and we're convinced that these relations may get even better in the future, because what brings us together are those spiritual values that I referred to in my presentation. That is why I will not be saying sweet words that could easily gain some approval from the audience. Italy is no longer the country that requires legitimacy through searching somebody's approval. What Italy needs is to get its message across and make it heard. But nowadays, that in many spheres there are countries that think that the future of our relations is the future of countries and iron curtains. Nowadays, it's fundamentally important to return to put in center the in-depth values that bring us together. And if we want to end the sanctions phase, we must first address the matter of Minsk agreements and fully implement the Minsk agreement and make it such that Russia should be the main actor here, because it's impossible to fight extremism and fanaticism without Russia in this huge international union. And extremism is something we should all fight and we should all prevail over.
President Nazarbayev, you follow the world energy markets very closely, of course, and I'm wondering, how do you read what is going on? Do you believe that Saudi Arabia has been raising output to ensure that prices stay low so that American shale producers are not able to produce, so that Iran does not have access to great resources? Has it worked? What do you think will happen to the price of oil going forward?
Here we have Mr. Pillerson present here, the largest company, ExxonMobil. We must ask him. We had a meeting today and we discussed this matter. I could support what he said, his opinion, that today's the situation about oil where the prices are about $50 per barrel, this is probably an objective reality. If we see volatility up and down around it, but as to Saudi Arabia, are they oppressing the American oil companies? This is a matter for experts. I don't really want to listen to expert opinions because tomorrow they will say something different. It seems like all the researchers, all the economists, all the financiers whose opinions were relied upon, I suppose they're all confused now. And the crisis that is now unrolling, nobody can give any specific recommendations. The fact remains a fact, and today in my presentation I mentioned that these falling prices, everybody stood to lose. Importers also lost, and the exporters surely lost. Surely the emerging markets also lost. Overall, we all stand to lose. So this topic of today's forum in St. Petersburg is that we should stop at facing a new reality. They are the prices that we have today. Is it bad? Yes, it is. But there is always, every cloud has a silver lining. Each and every of our country has started doing processing. We are now developing processing industry, industrialization. We focus on other industries that will be gradually catching up. So much for Saudi Arabia. Now the Prince Heir has presented a new program, and in the coming 20 years, after which they will carry out industrialization, Saudi Arabia wants to renounce on getting any oil revenues. This is really quite indicative, quite indicative. This is the largest oil producer. Also, they think that they should... I also personally think that in the coming decade, at least till mid of this century, the need for oil and gas will not go down, no matter how much they might speak about alternative energy sources such as solar energy, wind energy, no matter what. We are oil producers. We will continue to work without going down.
Prime Minister Renzi, there is a view that if Britain were to leave Europe, the European Union, that it would be possible to renegotiate terms and maybe over 2 to 3 years come up with a new way in which Britain can be part of the European Union. Do you believe that's possible, or do you believe that if Brexit happens, Britain is once and for all out of Europe?
Molto sinteticamente.
Well, to be brief, if UK should exit Europe, it's forever. It would be forever. It's not that there is a match and then a match when it's a guest match. No, if it should happen in short-term prospect, it will be a problem that will affect everybody in Europe. But in mid-term, that would be first and foremost a major problem for the Brits, not for the Europeans. the ones who take the most risk are the British citizens, British consumers, British pensioners. It's not citizens of United Europe, although probably at initial stages, I suppose it would be that we shall see a very serious financial tension. Secondly, I still think that victory will stay with those who want to stay with Europe and stay in Europe. For this reason, I believe that the Brits are much wiser than what is presented to us through surveys and polls. Thirdly, no matter what is the outcome of the referendum, on the 25th of March of 2017, Europe will be 70. She's a young girl, a young lady at 70, at 60. But what it needs, or what she needs, is to fully change her outlook upon herself. Even if at the Brexit referendum, even if those who champion for Britain staying in Europe should stay there, and it's not that if you're a Euroscepticist that will bring an end to Europe. No, on the 25th of March of 2017, when we shall celebrate 60 years of those documents that started the EU, that will take place in Rome. We saw the first signing of those accords. We should imagine a new Europe. That Europe that is based on austerity, it no longer works. Europe that should put as a focus of her attention human capital, values, technological innovation. This is the only Europe that can exist. Otherwise, it will be doomed to an end. I'm a European that holds an Italian passport, and I think it's fundamentally important that Europe should find the energy in its say, and not only chase the current events and trends, whatever it be. In 2017, Europe should start again. Otherwise, it will see its end.
Well, we've had a very wide-ranging discussion, and there have been points of disagreement and then points of profound agreement, such as on the quality of Kazakh qualified women to rule the world. President Putin, I was wondering if you may have some closing thoughts that you could give us, and then we will wrap up this session.
Я, во-первых, хотел бы всех поблагодарить.
First, I'd like to thank everyone, all those of you who have come to St. Petersburg for the forum. I'd like to also thank you, Mr. Zakaria. I think we've had a very substantial discussion, a very active one. We've agreed on some points and disagreed on other ones, but there are more things that unite us. Our friend from Italy kind of scared me in the end of his speech when he said that if there are no changes in Europe, it is doomed. You know, it sounds scary to me. I do not share this view, frankly speaking, because, you know, Europe is Europe. And the foundations of Europe's economy make us believe that Europe, in any case, no matter how the internal processes develop, will still remain our leading trade and economic partner. It is clear that leaders in Europe want high dynamics, and certainly we in Russia also support higher dynamics. And in my speech today, I spoke about what we can do in order to reach that level of dynamics. You know, I believe it is quite symbolic that there's a leader of one of the European countries here, and Italy is developing very dynamically at the moment. And also, the leader of Kazakhstan is here. Kazakhstan is our closest ally and partner. We are building an integration association together. I believe it is very symptomatic that this is only through linkage of our efforts that we can reach true development. This is what we have to focus on. Russia on its part, is going to take every effort to follow this way. We are going to develop from inside, to develop very actively, and to be open for all our partners. Thanks a lot. I wish all of you great success.